In 1989, this one park in Tokyo was worth more than the entire state of California. Taxi drivers were tipped $100 just to stop. The party was loud. The money was endless. Until it wasn't. This is the story of how Japan bought the world and lost its soul. If you walk through the streets of Tokyo in 1988, the air didn't just smell of exhaust and yakitori. It smelled of cash. It was an era where the sun was supposed to rise forever. A time when Japan wasn't just catching up to the West, it was buying the West. Rockefeller Center? Bought. The Pebble Beach Golf Course? Bought. A Van Gogh painting for $82 million? Bought and stored in a warehouse. They called it the bubble. But to the people living inside it, it didn't feel like a bubble. It felt like destiny. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, blindfolded by gold dust. And the music was so loud, nobody heard the ground cracking beneath them. This is the story of the greatest financial party in human history, and how it all went wrong. To understand the madness, you have to look at the dirt. Literally, in 1989, the land prices in Tokyo reached a point that defied mathematics, logic, and sanity. At the peak of the bubble, the land value of the Imperial Palace grounds, just that 1 square kilometer of green space in the center of Tokyo, was estimated to be worth more than the entire state of California. Let that sink in. Point 1 Park in Tokyo versus the entire coastline, the vineyards of Napa, the tech hubs of Silicon Valley, and the mansions of Hollywood combined. The Ginza district became the most expensive real estate in the solar system. A single square meter cost over 30 million yen. If you dropped a 10,000 yen bill on the ground, the land it covered was arguably worth more than the money itself. For the average citizen, the Japanese dream of owning a home turned into a multi-generational nightmare. Prices were so detached from salaries that banks introduced a new financial product. One that sounds like a dystopian joke today, but was deadly serious then: the 100-year mortgage. You sign the paper, you pay until you die, and then your children pay, and then your grandchildren pay. It was indentured servitude disguised as prosperity. But people signed them, because the only thing scarier than a 100-year debt was the fear of missing out on a market that only went up. Every murder has a weapon. Every fire has a spark. For the Japanese bubble, the spark was lit in a hotel room in New York City, September 22, 1985. The Plaza Accord, the United States, struggling with a massive trade deficit, pressured Japan to appreciate its currency. They wanted a weaker dollar to save American manufacturing. Japan agreed. Overnight, the yen skyrocketed. It doubled in value against the dollar. This phenomenon was known as indaka, or high yen. For a country built on exports, this looked like a catastrophe. Japanese goods became too expensive for the world to buy. The export machine stalled. Sony, Toyota, Panasonic, they were all screaming in panic. The government was terrified of a recession done so. The Bank of Japan opened the floodgates to stimulate the domestic economy. They slashed interest rates to historic lows, dropping them all the way to 2.5%. Suddenly, the market was drowning in cheap cash. Loans were practically free. If you were a company, a bank would beg you to borrow money. If you were an individual, they would throw cash at you just for walking past a branch. There was too much money and nowhere productive to put it. So, it went into the two things that couldn't run away: stocks and land. The bonfire was already built. The Plaza Accord just poured gasoline on it. This flood of cheap money changed the soul of Japanese business. Japan was famous for monozukuri, the artisan spirit of making things. But in the late 80s, making cars and Walkmans became boring. It was too slow. Why build a factory that returns 5% a year when you can buy land that returns 50% in a month? Enter the era of Zaytech. Financial engineering. Major corporations stopped being manufacturers and started acting like hedge funds. At one point, Toyota, the global paragon of manufacturing efficiency, was reportedly earning more profit from its financial trading divisions than from actually selling cars. Hanwha, a steel trading company, made so much from speculation that analysts joked they should stop selling steel entirely. The insanity reached its peak with a peculiar asset class: golf club memberships. In a crowded island nation, space was the ultimate luxury. A membership to an exclusive golf club became a tradable commodity, like a stock or a bond. There was a literal golf club membership exchange in Tokyo, with prices flashing on ticker boards at the height of the madness. A membership to the Kagane Country Club cost 400 million yen. That's nearly 3.5 million US dollars. For the right to play golf, companies bought them as assets. Banks accepted them as collateral for loans. You could mortgage a golf membership to buy an apartment. It was a hall of mirrors, where value was derived from nothing but the belief that the next person would be crazy enough to pay more. When money loses its meaning, society loses its mind. The bubble didn't just warp the economy, it warped human relationships. The streets of Tokyo became a theater of arrogance. In Ginza, flagging a taxi became a combat sport. The drivers were the kings. A ride that cost 2,000 yen required a 10,000 yen tip just to get the driver to stop. This was the era of the 10,000 yen taxi wave. Businessmen stood on the curb, waving bills with the face of Yukichi Fukuzawa. If you didn't wave a 10,000 yen note, you were invisible. Dating became a transaction. The standards for men skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Women, empowered by the booming economy and a shortage of eligible bachelors, demanded the three highs: the Sanko, high height, over 170 cm, high education, a degree from a top university, high income, a salary that could support a lifestyle of luxury. But one man wasn't enough. The commodification of romance led to a brutal classification system for men. You had the hami-ikun, the favorite, the potential husband. Then you had the messy-kun, the guy whose only job was to treat you to expensive meals. And finally, the saddest of them all, the assi-kun. Assi came from a shigeru, foot soldier, or simply legs. He was the guy with the imported luxury car. His job was to drive the woman to the club, wait for her while she partied, and drive her home safely. He got no romance, no affection, just the privilege of being her chauffeur. And in 1989, there were thousands of men willing to be assi-kun, just to be close to the light of the party. It was glorious, it was cruel, and it felt like it would never end. But parties always end, and usually, the better the party, the worse the hangover. By the winter of 1989, the party in Tokyo had become a delirium. The music was deafening, but in the back of the room, a man had just walked in, and he wasn't there to dance. He was there to pull the plug. His name was Yasushi Mino. In December 1989, Mino was appointed as the new governor of the Bank of Japan. Unlike the politicians and businessmen drunk on the euphoria of Japan as number one, Mino was cold, sober, and deeply disgusted by what he saw. He didn't view the bubble as economic success. He viewed it as a moral cancer that he famously believed that the skyrocketing land prices were destroying the soul of the nation. He saw a Japan where the sweat of the brow no longer mattered, where gambling was rewarded over hard work, and where average families were being priced out of their own country. He believed the bubble was evil, and he was willing to play the villain to destroy it. Most central bankers try to land a plane softly. Mino wanted to crash it. On December 25, 1989, Christmas Day, just days after taking office, he raised interest rates. The market ignored him. They thought he was bluffing. They thought the government would never let the party end. So, he raised them again, and again, and again. In just over a year, Mino jacked up the interest rate from the ultra-low 2.5% to a crushing 6%. It was a financial airstrike. The reaction was almost immediate. On the final trading day of 1989, the Nikkei stock index hit its all-time high of 38,915. It would never see that number again. As 1990 dawned, the intentional crash began. The stock market didn't just slide, it plummeted off a cliff. By October, nearly half of the market's value had evaporated. $2 trillion of wealth. Gone, the business leaders screamed. The politicians begged Mino to stop. But he earned a nickname in the press, the Grim Reaper. He stood over the dying economy and refused to lower the rates. He believed that for Japan to live, the bubble had to die that he got his wish. The fever broke, but the patient nearly died on the table. When a bubble bursts, the money disappears, but the debt stays. That is the tragedy of leverage. You borrow millions to buy a golf membership, believing it will be worth millions more next week. But when the market crashes, the membership is worth zero, and the bank still wants its millions back. From 1990 to 1992, the reality set in. The real estate market followed the stock market into the abyss. In some prime areas of Tokyo, land values dropped by 80%. The 100-year mortgages? They became chains. Families were stuck paying off loans for tiny condos that were now worth a fraction of what they owed. They were underwater, drowning in negative equity with no way to surface. For many, the shame was too much to bear. In Japanese culture, the stigma of bankruptcy is profound. It isn't just a financial failure. It is a failure of character, a disgrace to one's family name. So, people chose to disappear. This gave rise to a dark industry known as the yanaja, or night moving companies. These were specialized movers who operated in the shadows. For a fee, they would come to your house in the dead of night. They would pack up your essentials, cover the windows, and whisk you and your family away to a secret location. They helped you wipe your grid. New names, new jobs, new lives. They became the Jahatsu, the evaporated people. Tens of thousands of Japanese citizens simply vanished from the census records. They abandoned their debts, their friends, and their pasts, living as ghosts in the slums of Osaka or the rural countryside, always looking over their shoulders. For those who couldn't run, there was a darker exit. The suicide rate in Japan surged. The forests at the base of Mount Fuji, the Aokigahara, became infamous not for their beauty, but for the number of businessmen who walked in and never walked out. There was a grim financial logic to it. In Japan, life insurance policies often paid out for suicide after a waiting period. For a father facing unpayable debts and loan sharks, his own life became the only asset he had left that was liquid. He could trade his life to clear the debt for his family. It was the ultimate, tragic transaction of the bubble's collapse. The physical scars of this era are still visible today if you know where to look. Drive out of Tokyo, into the mountains of Gunma or the coastlines of Aizu, and you will find them. The Heikyo, abandoned resort towns. Theme parks built to emulate Holland or America, now rusting in the rain. Luxury hotels with chandeliers still hanging from the ceilings, lobbies filled with moss, guest registers open to 1991. These are the tombstones of the bubble. Massive concrete skeletons of vacation condos that were started in the frenzy and abandoned when the money ran out. They stand as silent, rotting monuments to an optimism that turned into arrogance. The crash didn't just last for a few years. It triggered what economists call the lost decades. 10 years turned into 20, and 20 turned into 30, the economy stagnated. The lifetime employment system, the bedrock of Japanese society, began to crack. The confident, invincible salaryman of the 80s was replaced by the freighter, contract workers with no security and no future. But the deepest scar isn't on the GDP charts. It's in the mind. The crash fundamentally rewrote the DNA of Japanese society. The generation that grew up watching their parents suffer under the collapse, watching them pay off debts for assets that were worthless, decided not to play the game at all. They are called the Satori Seidai, the enlightened generation, or more accurately, the resigned generation. In the 80s, the goal was the Ferrari, the Rolex, the Ginza hostess bar. The Satori generation wants none of it. They don't buy cars. They don't buy designer watches. They don't drink alcohol. They aren't even interested in dating. Economists call it a low-desire society. It's not just that they can't afford these things. It's that they rationally reject them. They saw what greed did to their country. They saw the high-risk, high-return lifestyle destroy their families, so they chose no risk, low return. They chose stability over ambition, silence over noise. Walk through Tokyo tonight. The neon lights are still there. The trains still run on time. The city is cleaner and safer than it was in 1989. But something is missing. The electricity is in the wires, but it's no longer in the air. That feeling that anything was possible, that Japan was the center of the universe, that the party would go on forever, that is gone. The bubble was a collective dream. And for the last 30 years, Japan has been learning how to live in the waking world. The glass has been swept up. The music has stopped. But if you listen closely in the quiet alleys of Ginza, you can still hear the echoes of the party that never ended, until it did. We explore every side of Japanese culture, from the craftsmanship of ramen to the madness of the bubble economy, the light and the shadow. If you love Japan and want to uncover its hidden stories, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.